Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Enablement Brew. I'm Carly Lehner.
And I'm Malvina. We're so excited you're joining us for this brand new episode of 2023. I remember last year I got the year wrong, so I got it right this time, 2023. And on today's episode, we are joined by a guest, Stephanie White from Lupio.
Hello, everybody. So very excited to be here. Thank you both so much for having me. I am Senior Director of Revenue Enablement at Lupio, and I'm coming to you from a somewhat frigid, snow is falling. Christmas is starting to happen in Canada, and it is the seasonal winter that I'm bringing all of you behind me here. So this is your winter experience coming in this morning.
Oh, love it. So before we dive into today's topic, which is our all around people enablement, dealing a little bit with emotions, optimizing the people that we have, optimizing the processes, the tech stack that we have, but really having our sellers top of mind. Before we jump into that topic, what is everyone drinking? Stephanie, we'll start with you first.
Well, I'm prepared and I am here for you both. So with two hostesses, I have two drinks. So I'm ready to do 2 cups while we film this episode today. And I will be highly energized throughout.
Is that an Ember mug?
It is, yeah.
Do you like it?
I would say it is worth it. I hesitated because I thought, do I really need technology in a mug? And then they went on sale and I was like, yeah, okay, I'll try it. I can justify it. It is pretty wonderful.
Yeah.
Wait, what is this mug?
Oh, Malvina.
So the mug actually has a little charging pad. I did not hook it up to my cell phone, though you can. This is now turning into an infomercial. We won't do that for everybody. There's a little charging pad, and it does keep your drink to a hot temperature. So what's amazing is I have my French press beside me. I keep it beside me throughout the morning for morning meetings, especially after a weekend. And I just got my mug, and my mug keeps it perfectly warm for the next couple of hours while we're in meetings.
Oh my God. How did you know it was that mug?
Well, I mean, so I got my dad one for Christmas 2021. I got my mother-in-law one for Christmas 2022. She's like notorious for leaving her mug in the microwave and forgetting about it because she goes to like reheat it. And then like 3 hours later, my husband, like when he lived back at home, he would go like warm up leftovers for lunch and like her mug would be in the microwave. So it's a gift that I've given multiple people, but I'm kind of like, should I get one for myself? But I don't know. I haven't decided yet.
All I would say is you do it for yourself. It is worth it. I hesitated. I had picked one up for somebody else also. And it's amazing. And I think this is so perfect as we talk about enablers. We often give more to others than we give ourselves. So Carly, enable yourself.
Yeah. I love that. Well, I mean, my mug is pretty, I mean, it's a cute ceramic mug, which I love a ceramic mug. So I'd have to like give that up for an Ember mug. But I have tea and oat milk. So,
nice.
and it's gone a little bit cold. So again, selling the Ember mug.
Yeah.
Malvina, please don't tell me you have instant coffee.
Nescafe, 2 teaspoons, sugar, and oat milk. Mm.
I can't believe it. When we make it big, Malvina, I'm buying you an espresso.
So you'll laugh. I have an espresso machine downstairs, but when I'm in a rush, I feel like it's so much easier to boil the kettle, put like the 2 teaspoons in rather than wait for the espresso to make the coffee.
I love the sound effect.
I don't like the sound of it either, you know?
Very loud. Yeah.
Very loud.
Although you could get the French press like Stephanie has.
I know.
But that takes more time. I get it. Instant coffee can be convenient.
I mean, anyway, it doesn't. Just like quick little French press plug, it doesn't. I have an espresso. I have a pot coffee maker. I have a travel size coffee maker. And they are all conveniently on my kitchen counter. And I use them to boil water to have my French press at my desk. Because there is an element of just like enjoying it. And it doesn't take that long.
Yeah.
It's okay.
All for the enablement. All for the new year. We're going to enable ourselves, Carly.
Yes, we're going to do it. So Stephanie, you want to talk about this concept of people enablement, which I'm like super excited about because we always talk about like revenue, sales enablement, but like people enablement is very similar and obviously related. But kind of tell us about like what does this mean to you and why do you think it's important?
Yeah. So this has become a little bit of my mantra for this year. I was very, very focused on process and driving efficiency, as I think a lot of us are, right? I was like, where are things holding up? How do I remove friction points? How do I do the things? And it was all focused on, automation, which is absolutely critical as you want to be more effective in your sales process. Automation and where do we have duplicative efforts and where do we have these breakdowns in our process? And what kind of happened is I started to solve for a lot of those things. And then people still weren't totally happy. And it's interesting because as somebody who started selling way back in the day with a phone book, now I'm dating myself, but I remember cold calling out of a physical phone book with pages. I just thought, well, you have all these amazing tools. You have all of these things at your fingertips. How are you still not happy? And I realized it wasn't about the tools anymore, because once those things meet a minimum standard and they're no longer an obstacle, people want more for themselves. They want to be fundamentally seen and treated as people, not cogs in a machine. So make the machine work super well, make it ergonomically designed, absolutely, and then focus on your people. And so for me, people enablement is really, again, assuming you've done those other process things in place and you've got the right environment. How are you growing and nurturing and empowering your people? How do you create a safe space for them to say, hey, by the way, nobody's called me out on it yet, but I'm really not feeling good about how I approach this ICP. Can I get some help on this? Here's a call that I have that I didn't do very well. And I would really love some feedback. Giving them the place to be vulnerable to drive their growth is where my mindset has gone in 2022.
How do you do that?
Yeah,
How do
I
you
love
do
the
that?
concept.
So I no
I'm
specific
thinking as an
formula.
enabler, so I'm thinking, what's the process for that?
Yeah, I think so. It's a lot of things, right? And this is where it's like, perfect. We all have drinks. We can settle in. And I'd love to hear from each of you, your perspective as well. I don't have a set formula, but here's some of the themes that I've heard and that I've been working towards. The, constant up and down of the sales profession, let's call it that, for people who are early in their sales careers. If anybody has been 3 years or less in sales, they really haven't experienced sales yet, especially if they were in SaaS or another tech. The last few years, we exploded when the lockdown happened. So many companies IPO'd, we had unicorns everywhere. And it was this doing the basic, you were making money, you were doing well, you were hitting quota without having to work too hard. Well, things have shifted. And in the last few months, we start to hear and see those sentiments from people with less sales experience where they're like, all I hear is no all day long. Like, I'm failing. How was I succeeding? And now I'm failing. And I think the minute I heard that sentence, for me, it really hit home of recognizing the newer generation of seller that we have right now. And so I'm going to split those out specifically as a group to talk about, because how you empower and enable those people is going to be very different than folks who are 10 years plus in sales.
Yeah.
And when we think about, our newer sellers, there is this feeling of, I was riding a wave. I was doing really great. I was fresh out of school. I got it. Like I knew the things. I did the tech stack. And now nobody wants to respond to me. But I'm working harder. And no one wants to give me information. They're just hanging up on me or they're not answering at all. And so what I'm hearing is a lot of self-doubt creep in. There's some great opportunities to start to dig into why is the imposter syndrome happening. But again, as we think about coaching from sales enablement, it's not therapy, right? Like coaching is not therapy. And it's also not telling them to do their jobs. It's trying to understand where are their strengths and weaknesses. How do we amplify their strengths rather than just focusing on their weakness? So at an initial level, that is kind of what got me started on this and where I start. So with each of our new hires that we have come through, our enablement team partners with them. We own them, so to speak, for the first 30 days. And then we're half responsible until the end of 4 months. Now, that's amazing having that transition because we get to be their welcome wagon, but then we create this safe space where keep talking to me, keep telling me what's going on. As their manager starts to talk to them about things like quota attainment and, breaking down their calls for them, we continue to be this layer over the first 4 months, which is, I'm here to support you. I'm literally here to enable you. You want to talk about how you're hitting activity levels? That's your manager. You want to come to a safe place and brainstorm how you can write copy and here's a terrible call, help me out. That's where we're going to be here for you. Mm-hmm. And so I will stop talking a minute, I promise. And so part of it is for us on Fridays, it's a little bit of the line, like we're going to have a one-on-one and your manager is not going to be there. And, it's a one-to-one conversation where you can feel safe, kick back, put your feet up and tell me about your feelings. Where are you at? Where do you feel strong? Where do you feel weak? And based on where they feel strong and where they feel weak, we change their program for the following week and how we're going to support them. We'll give them more or less of our standard content to make sure that they're excelling in the ways that they need to be successful. Coffee.
I read on, I think it was a post on LinkedIn actually, that the best sales leaders are not found in a time where things are going super well and the economy is doing incredibly well. The best sales leaders are actually the ones who prove themselves when it's an economic downturn, when times are tough, right? How do you motivate your team? How do you continue driving best practices forward? How do you make small adjustments to ensure that your team does hit quota? So to your point, they're not saying I'm working harder, but I'm not seeing any results. Well, doing the same thing over and over again is the definition of insanity, right? Mm-hmm. No one wants to do that. I think having that safe space, love the idea. I think a lot of enablement leaders probably listening to this will say, well, I want to have that safe space, right? I want them to know that I'm here to help and support them. But sometimes that's challenging to do, right? And you mentioned those two categories, those sellers who have been in their role less than 3 years, and those that are potentially more tenured, right? Have a lot more experience, who oftentimes, let's face it, don't want to change, don't want to acknowledge their own weaknesses, don't want to come out, right? Because maybe they're going to be called out for doing something wrong or not doing something the way that it was intended to be done. And then that behavior rubs off a little bit on people who are more junior. And at the end of the day, who do they look up to? Yes, they'll look up to their sales manager. They'll look up to that VP of sales. But a lot of those behaviors I also find are taken from the more tenured sales reps. And then that becomes really challenging for enablement to actually impact and influence or even provide that safe space, right? Because the last thing we want is we give someone 30 minutes, an hour of our time. We have this open conversation. They leave the room, but they actually end up going back to doing the same exact thing that they were doing before. Yeah. How do you deal with that?
First of all, I love that article that you found, or the post that you mentioned on LinkedIn. Send it to me if you can.
I will.
Because I do think that, in times of challenges, that's where we see people's true colors. And I think that's true for leaders and for sellers. Right now, you are seeing if you are at 40, 50, 60% revenue attainment across your org, you are seeing people's real colors come out. Yeah, right. They're feeling stressed. I think, it's not something, so tactically, things you can do to foster a culture of people feeling safe to always be learning, right? If we think of it that way, you can create small peer call review cohorts. You can create the anonymous options to submit questions. You can also create the regular touch points, which is like, listen, this is off the record. This is you and me talking. Come call me. Like, this is just you and me. It's just Malvina and Steph. Forget our job titles. I like to use the expression business cards off the table for anyone who remembers business cards. I think ultimately, when we talk about culture of negative contributions of culture and positive ones, that's something that the whole sales leadership team and beyond needs to be invested in.
Yeah.
What do you want the heartbeat of your revenue organization to be? You know, I've heard people refer to enablement as the heartbeat of the revenue org. And I personally love that. And the first time my leader said that to me, I was like, I got all the feelings. I was like, yes, I'm doing great things, because they feel like we're connected to all the bits that need to happen and we're essential. But I also think that's a really slippery slope. To your point, you cannot look to enablement to set the culture for your entire revenue org. It's not something we can be accountable for. Is it something that we can impact? Depends on the org and the size of the org. Is it something we can influence? I think, again, in small pieces. I like to focus on, the first 4 months with people, because I truly believe, to your comment of people who've been doing it for 10 years, that's a different nut. And sometimes when those folks dig their heels in, that's a one-on-one conversation that the leader needs to be having. Like, that's like, listen, your attitude sucks lately. I get it. You hit 120% of quota year over year over year. And any of us that have been in sales know these people. We can think of at least one of them. And they sandbag and they do all the wrong behaviors. But I like to look at it, if it's a one-person issue, it's the manager's responsibility. If it's impacting 2 or more people on a team, that's when there's an opportunity for enablement to get involved in a group coaching or a group culture setting experience. But the one-offs, honestly, they're tricky. I had one in the last couple of years that I did have to flag to the leader. Okay. You may not be aware of this, but in small group cohorts and in listening on calls that are being recorded, and everything gets recorded these days, here's some of the things that I'm hearing. More importantly, here's how it doesn't align with what we've established as a leadership team we want our company culture to be. So here's some concrete examples. Now, we always joke about this. We're happy to build things, but then who's going to own it long term? Here is the information and the coaching kit that I can provide you with documentation and insights in my own personal experience. Now over to you as the sales leader. You need to go run with this. I think the newer folks often are the ones who are most open to coaching, to your comment. Right? Because they're like, sure, I'll give it a try. I'm not stuck in my ways. But I also think sometimes the biggest impact you can have is with somebody who digs their heels in the first couple of times. And you're like, I'm going to get you. I'm going to figure out why you're resisting me. It's like that the Wedding Crashers scene where she's like, I'm going to find you. I always have that play in my head. I'm like, you're my resistor. I know who you are. And this would be my tip for other enablement leaders. You know who your resistors are. Like, you can probably think in each of your orgs, ladies, like, who are the couple of people who are going to push back or not adopt on something? Get ahead of that. Go figure out why. They can become your best asset and ally in terms of building better content, creating better programs, and then getting them to endorse it. Like, I love doing that personally.
Yeah. Those can be the most rewarding when you finally get someone who's maybe a little bit hesitant or resistant. And they're like, yeah, actually, this is really helpful. Or like, this tool actually does help me sell better, or makes me way more efficient, or, insert any reason here. Those are definitely the most rewarding, but they are the most challenging. But I mean, that's typically how rewards go, right? The more challenging they are, the more
I
reward.
recently got a message from someone saying, Malvina, this latest piece of tech you brought on board, it's the best thing ever. And I was like, yay. And I was like, wait, what about all the other things we brought on board this year? Right? It makes you question things, which kind of brings me on to the second point. 2022, up until the middle of it, right? A lot of companies and organizations were still bringing on a lot of new tech, trying to see what are the new bells and whistles we can bring on board. How can they make our sellers more efficient? 2023 is going to be all about how can we optimize what we have? And to your point, Stephanie, really, truly make it work for the people, rather than just having a new process created or a new piece of tech brought on board. So driving those efficiencies, really optimizing, is going to be a priority. For enablement leaders tuning into this podcast episode, they're thinking, well, great, I have a tech stack of 15 different tools, right? Some sit with enablement, some sit with marketing, some sit with someone else. How do we start? How do we begin, right? Because we want to have this people first approach. Having those conversations, hearing the feedback is essential. Then a big part of enablement is also prioritizing, making sure that you're spending your time efficiently. And sometimes that can be challenging because you can start working on something that you think is important, but actually it turns out that's not going to be the thing that's going to so-called move the needle.
It's not a small question. I go to my big rocks. So I would love to focus on people all day long. The reality is I'm not a people operations team. We need to strategically align with what the business is trying to do, to your point. So what are the big rocks for the business? Some companies will describe them as OKRs. Some people call them big rocks. Some people call them pillars. As you're going into next year, know very clearly what they are, what you officially own of them, and what you can sneak in. The latter of those being my favorite. And here's what I mean. You may have, so for those who aren't familiar with Loopio is a sales response automation platform that in effect drives efficiency and allows you to write higher quality responses to increase your win rates. I'll use that as an example. If you are saying, okay, I need to drive increased revenue, we know that our team has a frozen headcount, or even worse, we're going to decrease our headcount in 2023, which is the reality for a lot of organizations. But not only do I need to be able to enable my sellers to hit the same revenue target, that actually needs to go up plus 20 points. And for anybody listening to this where that resonates, that is a very real and stark reality for each of us. And we feel like our job security, I know for me, is tied to those numbers, right? Things that we can't control. We don't decide on the headcount of sellers. We don't set the revenue target for the team, but how can we impact that in a meaningful way? One of the exercises that I've done, and I'll just use that as an example, is how much time were each of our sellers spending to respond to an RFP? Because let's be honest, a lot of sellers are like, I hate RFPs. They're a necessary evil. I was a former seller. 2:00 in the morning, I was redrafting because I physically had to hand one in by 9 a.m., right before e-submission years ago. And it's the cause of a couple of things. One, loss of productivity. Two, loss of employee morale and engagement because you're frustrated. But there's also the money that's getting left on the table in terms of business insights and deals you're losing. So I love to pick one or two projects for the year that aligns with your company OKRs, pillars, or big buckets, and find which of those is a pain point for your people. Then find the business metrics to back up why you need that change. For example, in this case, if an AE spent on average, let's just say 7 hours responding to an RFP, that sound about right based on your experience?
Yeah,
it's going to vary, but 7 hours. They don't want to be doing that. I've yet to meet an AE who's like, I would love my job to be RFPs. That would be amazing. No, they want to be out talking to people, building those relationships. And so how can we build a better process or leverage the tech stack we have to reduce that 7 hours down? Goal one from a people perspective. But goal one from a business perspective is like, okay, how do we still drive increased revenue with that change? And so I think, and this is going to be controversial, but here it goes. I think some people need to look at cannibalizing the tech stack. If what you have in your tech stack is not aligning with your big rocks, you need to make some serious decisions. Yeah. If you are spending, and some of these tools, especially if you've got 15 tools, some of them cost a lot, $1,000 plus per user in your sales org. Get from finance what the breakdown of those tools is and actually do an ROI from your objective perspective as an enablement department. And it's not about the dollars listed. You have to stack rank them. Now, let's assume your CRM is a given because we're not allowed to pull those out, generally speaking. That would be bad news. But work down the rest of your list. What's the second most expensive tool that your business has today? How important is that to your selling motion, truly and objectively? And go down the list and rank it against the importance to your sellers for them to be able to do their jobs. Once you've done that, go through those importance ones and star any of them where you know there's a frustration point or a problem. That is where you find the exact 2 projects that you can start honing in. Okay, we've got a content management system. It costs a whole lot of money. It's moderate importance to our team today, but it's a huge point of frustration. This is now where I need to focus. This is my bullseye because I can align it to the business value. I can align it to the function of our revenue cycle, and I can align it to improving employee experience. This is a bucket I want to move in H2.
Yeah. I think any sellers listening to this would be thinking, well, great, I still have a target to hit and I'm hearing no one's buying any new tech.
But so I think this is where it gets interesting, because just because you're cannibalizing a tool doesn't mean you aren't buying another one. Buy the ones that your business needs.
Yeah.
And I think it's easy for a lot of companies to say, I drive efficiency. Cool. Show me the numbers is my response on that. Show me the ROI. So for sellers, to your point, make sure your business cases are very clearly conveying the ROI unique to the prospect. Get those data points and make it super clear. This is how you personally, Carly, are going to drive X million dollars in increased revenue for a cost of Y. And this is the amount of time it's going to save your employees. I think there's some tools we all need to rip out and start fresh. I won't list them because we don't want this to be super controversial. But I do think there's some we need to rip out because they're not as valuable as we go into 2023 being concerned about efficiency of our team and the experience of our team as we were, let's say, 5 years ago.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And so my husband was in sales. That's how Malvina and I know each other. Our husbands worked together in sales. But one of the things that he said recently that made a lot of sense to me was your product should be a painkiller and not a vitamin. And right now, a lot of companies are like, these vitamins are nice to have, but I can do without them. I could probably do without taking vitamin D living in the UK. It would be great if I could have vitamin D in my life, but I'll survive, right? And so, but painkillers are really, really important. And so I kind of think about if I'm going to get rid of some vitamins, that actually gives me more that I could spend on painkillers. And so we just brought on a new tool last month, even though a lot of companies aren't buying right now. We actually really needed this, and it's going to actually set the company up for success in the future. So that's kind of how I'm looking at the stack. And it's just such an important conversation to have about stack ranking, how much you spend, how important it is, where the pain points are that reps have. So kind of get rid of some of those vitamins and think about the painkillers and making them better. So I absolutely love that. The topic that is on everyone's mind, we see it all over LinkedIn. We've talked about it on the podcast a couple times, is burnout. And because Stephanie, what you mentioned was we're seeing, the reps who have been in sales 3 years or less are experiencing their first real downturn in an economy, and their performance is suffering. They're likely going through some level of burnout. And so how do we in 2023, I don't know, I would love to be able to prevent burnout. But if we can't prevent it, how do we, I guess, help reps through that process? And especially when they're kind of turning the corner from burnout, how do we help, kind of back to our people enablement topic? How do we help them get back to where they want to be in terms of productivity and achievement and that sort of thing.
So I think just a good time to call out, we aren't therapists.
Yeah.
And there is certainly a line, whether you're a people manager or an individual contributor, where you don't want to overstep when it comes to somebody's mental health, right? And your people operations team and employee benefits are so critical for addressing acute stress issues. But if we think about tactical or operational ways that we can help people rebound, right? So, okay, I got stress happening evenings and weekends, let's say, just a simple example. How do I make sure that Monday morning I'm like, all right, let's do this. Like, I got this part of my day. I know what I need to do. I know how I need to do it, and I'm going to go knock them down. I think that's our opportunity of where we can focus on thinking about, whether you're coming back from holidays or whether you've taken a leave recently for family care or other, how do you feel like, I got this, right? Coming into work. So I think there's a couple of, frankly, pretty operational, tactical, and human elements that we can address. Clarity. What does success look like? Let's park quota for a second, because anybody going into 2023 needs to be looking at their quota. Is it realistic for today's market? Whether you have done top-down planning, bottom-up, or any combination of a hybrid model, if you did it 6 months ago, you need to revisit it now, because things have shifted and the headcount allocation and the quota allocation may need to change. So let's assume that quota is clear and fair based on the market and the product that you have. Have you actually shared with your reps what the core behaviors are as leading indicators that is going to give them the success? It amazes me how many enablers I talk to where I'm like, have you done your competencies? They're like, no. And it's like a dirty secret. Like, a lot of people don't want to admit that they haven't done it, but it's like, okay, let's talk about why competencies are good. That tells your sellers the 7 or 8, keep it under 10 for sure. I find under 5 is not realistic. So like 7 or 8 competencies of behaviors they'll demonstrate to make them successful, so that quota attainment is the lagging indicator that they're going to hit.
Yep.
Sit down with the leaders for each of those roles, not the people, the roles, and identify what are the behaviors categorically that we want to be focusing on as an enablement team to train and make sure that those competencies are there. Do that for each role. Super important. I like to take that one step further for people. What are the levels within that? So some people say, level 1 to 5, are they grade people? A, B, C, D, E, F. I've even heard. To me, that gives me flashbacks to school. We don't need that for anybody. No. I actually break down our competencies in terms of when we expect them to be demonstrating those behaviors. The reason why I do that is because that sets a realistic expectation for the employee of something objective they can measure themselves against. So if they know, for example, product information, right? Product knowledge, critical competency for any seller. At the end of month 1, here's what you should be able to demonstrate in terms of product knowledge. End of your ramping period, here's how you should be able to do it. End of 6 months, here's how you should do it. And by the way, when you can do it at this level, this is when you're talking mastery. This is when we may start talking about a promotion for you. Being able to give people that clarity in their behaviors that will drive quota attainment as a lagging indicator is both good for business and good for the person. And the last thing, kind of off the top, I would say, is career mapping.
Yeah.
So you have fair quota, right? You've established that, which is your lagging indicator. You've got your competencies. You've shared it. People know, okay, listen, I'm at month 4. Here's what I should be able to say and convey in terms of product knowledge. Amazing. But as they progress and they get to that mastery level, what's next? How do they know when they qualify to interview for another role in the organization? How do they even know how that layers up? It can be as simple as building a deck that says like, hey, here is the common, not set, but common career progression that we see from a junior SDR to get to a senior. Here's the quota attainment. Here's the competency levels we'd love to see from you. And here's some of the inner team behaviors. And actually being able to give them that, you've suddenly empowered the person They know what they need to do to get to success. They know the definition of quota attainment success. And they also know that they have a future that you're invested in helping them grow through. Those are 3 things, just as we think about how do we empower people on a Monday, for me personally, would be super helpful.
I love that. I think that gives a lot of food for thought for anyone starting off now in January thinking like, great, I've had Christmas. I'm back full force. Let's focus on the right things. You open your laptop on the Monday. Where do I begin? What do I start with? I think you've given our listeners a lot of food for thought. So thank you so much.
Thank you both.
Yeah. I think it's especially if you're a team of one in enablement or a small enablement team,
Yeah.
having this like people element is going to fall to the, back burner really easily when you have just loads of things to do. But breaking it down the way that you just walked us through makes it like a no-brainer. And it still ties back to all those core competencies and enablement that we have, and all the things that we work on. And so if you can kind of all have it in that nice layer, like it's going to make it a lot easier to achieve this like people enablement approach. So yeah, I totally resonated with everything you said.
We all learn from each other. Look at that happening in real time, everybody.
All right, you need to top up your coffee, Stephanie.
I do. I know. I do.
All right. Well, I think that's a wrap for this first episode of 2023. So
Crazy.
thank you everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.